Hello everyone, welcome to my stream. So I'm streaming a little late today, so I want to apologize for that. I had some things to do this morning. I had to do some shopping, unpacking, and then having lunch. So I'm about an hour and a half over, and there's a bit of a delay on the stream. So we're looking at about, I think the delay is about 20 seconds. So I can see that my webcam doesn't match what I'm saying. So there you are. But I hope you're all having a lovely day. So this is a Sunday afternoon here in Western Australia. And I'm going to continue on with my picture of Sergeant Schultz from Hogan's Heroes. And now this was a show which was, I think it was 1971 or 1965 to 1971. And I watched the reruns. So when I was going to school, when I came home after school, we would sit after homework and we would watch the reruns of Hogan's Heroes. So it has nostalgic memories for me. And so this is going to be added to my Nostalgia Art Portraits Instagram when it's finally finished. So I made a start on it, as you can see, some pen and ink work of Sergeant Schultz's face, and I'm just going to do the rest of it. I've got not too much to do, but it will require a little bit of work on my part because there's a lot of very dark areas that I have still to put in. So I'm going to be sort of seeing what I can do with this. It's going to be tricky, but because I started late, most likely I will be streaming till late, but it all depends on how far I get and how many people tune in and all that sort of thing. I'll switch on my other light. Make it a bit lighter. So now I can see my screen. It's lit up a bit for me, makes it a bit easier for me to do my artwork. Okay, so I'm just gonna do it. If I move this back this way a bit, makes it a bit higher, and then I can move it down a bit lower. Here we go. All right, so I'm using the pens that I was using last time. Now these are my favorite pens. I have used dip pen before. Somebody asked me the other day whether I use dip pens, calligraphy pens, to do my illustrations. I might do that at some point in the future, just for something a little bit different. But for now, to get this cross-hatching effect that I'm using an illustrative style. So I'm using illustration pens, and the ones that I use, my favorites, are these Copic multi-liners, and they're very good. You can get them from Officeworks, you can get them from online stationery shops, you can get them from pretty much anywhere. They come in all sizes from 0.03, which is the smallest I've found, which is quite fine, up to a medium brush. So 0.8 is the largest pen, then you've got a medium brush, and the medium brush is quite thick. Any thicker than that, and I tend to then go to Indian ink and a paintbrush, but for the sake of the features, I definitely stick with the thinner sizes of the pen. And the thing I like the most about these Copics, and what I tend to use, whether I use these ones or other sorts of pens which are out there, and there are a few different types that I use. Sometimes I'll use Unipin, which are another good brand, and Unipin come in a few different sizes. And sometimes I'll use Typo, which are a local stationery supplier, which are also quite good. Now, the only thing that is a criteria for my pen and ink is that it has to be, what I look for is it has to be waterproof. So the felt tips and things like that, the fine liners that I use, are always waterproof for this style of illustration, because the last thing I want to do when I put watercolor over the top is to have all the ink, the black ink, run and dirty the watercolors. Not the technique I'm going for. So I always look out for the waterproof ones. These ones, the Typo ones say they're water-based and they're non-toxic, and the Copics say they're pigment ink, water and Copic proof. Now the Copics are good because you can use them with Copic markers, which I don't use, but a lot of people use the Copic markers, and they're alcohol markers, and they don't dissolve these either, which they sometimes probably could do with the other type of ink pen. So there's a little bit of extra information for you if you're looking to do similar sort of illustration style. Now, for those that don't know me, I'm a graphic illustrator. So basically it means that I'm an illustrator, a technical illustrator, and that is my I was a graphic designer, but now I moved to technical illustration, and I'm actually specialize in portrait art. So I'm mostly a portrait artist. I do other sorts of art too, but my favorite is by far, my passion is portraits. So I do all sorts of portraits, whether that be wildlife, celebrities, pets, dog portraits, cats, animals, you name it. They're the sort of portraits that I do, birds and things. So that's most of my portfolio consists of, basically portraits of various things. My favorite media that I tend to use lots of different media. So sometimes if you look at my slideshow art down the bottom there below my webcam, you'll see some of the artwork that I have done over the years, and I use a variety of different things. So early days I used to do a lot of colored pencil work, so I'll do some graphite, but mostly colored pencil, a little bit of pen and ink back then, and some acrylic. I also work in pastels, but I tend not to work too much in pastels because of the mess. But I've started working more in watercolor, so I've done a lot of watercolor portraits and a lot of pen and ink portraits. But my latest style, which is by far the most exciting for me, is the combining of the two different styles that I really like. So pen and ink, which I'm doing at the moment, and then watercolor over the top, which gives the graphic kind of like a graphic novel kind of illustration effect. So this is illustrative as opposed to particularly painterly or impressionist or anything like this. This is quite illustrative, and this is my latest style, which I absolutely love. So if you'd like to check out more of my other pictures other than what's on my slideshow here, you can find me on Instagram, and it's on the About Me section in Twitch. So I have two Instagrams. One is Harmony1965 _Doris, which is where I store all my other illustrations I do, all the portraits I've done, different types of artwork, not just portraits, a bit of cosplay, costume, dress up, Halloween stuff and things like that. My other Instagram is the Nostalgia Art Portraits, which is also myself, but it is entirely the nostalgic pictures that I have started doing recently, probably over the last few months now. And you'll see everything that's nostalgic for me, which are things like television shows I used to watch when I was growing up, things from the bygone era, even those things before my time, definitely things before my time. And that's where I'm going to be putting all the sort of pictures like that, the old Hollywood stars, musicals, anything nostalgic, old portraits of grandparents, and nostalgia, whimsy, memories, that sort of thing. That'll go in my nostalgic art portraits. And of course things like old shows, like I said, like Hogan's Heroes, which this is. So what I do with these is I start with the pen and ink illustration, and I work the pen and ink illustration first until I finish completely with the black and white pen and ink. Then I will sign it, and then I scan, and I scan it at a high resolution black and white, grayscale, so that I can keep that, and then I can always produce a coloring in book or something like that, comic book or something later. But I always like to keep the black and white version, because the black and white version always looks completely different. As soon as you put color over the top of it, it changes the whole mood, it changes the whole feel, the whole illustration goes from flat comic book to almost three-dimensional, but still not realistic, not super realistic, but a sort of like a graphic novel style. So I like to keep both, because if I keep the black and white one, I've always got a comparison between what it starts off looking like and what it ends up looking like. So that's why I do a pen and ink first, and then the watercolor over the top. And the watercolor is quite exciting, but it is a process in and of itself. So without further ado, I'm going to continue on with my picture. And like I said, I've made a start, and my illustration at the moment is based on an old reference picture I found, which is black and white. So that will make it much more difficult, especially when it comes to do the color over the top. And a lot of the illustration is missing, so I've had to add some details in using other pictures, basing it on, like, I don't know what's going on inside this area here, because I don't have a picture, a reference which kind of fills in that area. I've done my best, but we'll see. Anyway, so if you watch me illustrating, you will see that I tend to jump around a fair bit in my art styles. So I might be working on, say, this area here, and then the next instant I might be over here. And there's a reason for that. I do this so that I always have a point of reference from one part of the picture to the next, so that I can always keep track of which areas are dark, which areas are light, compare them against the areas that I've already done. So I'm going to, I tend not to outline things in general. I don't like to completely outline things, which is why this style is so different for me, because the style involves me having to outline things, which I don't particularly, not particularly fond of doing, but there you go. Now this is his ear, so and I can do thick and thin lines, but it gets a bit lost in here. So there's actually a lot of detail which has been bled out in the reference I've got. So because a lot of it's in shadow, like in here. And then there's a bit in here. And what I do is I constantly check back on the reference I have and double check that I'm on the right track. And make sure that I don't go wrong. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but the shapes do kind of still have to make sense. So I've still got areas to work on in here, and sometimes I'll just cross hatch lightly and sometimes I'll make it darker. Now this is tricky because there's a shadow, so I'll stop speaking for a moment and just do the hair continues on. This is the shadow of the hat, so you can't really see a lot of what is going on in here. Keep on track here, because this is still some of his ear. And in here, now all this is dark in here, so it's going to be quite difficult for me to make something in here, but I can cross hatch. I just have to put the shapes underneath so that I can actually see what I'm doing. And I will use the small brush.
Just double checking you were recording you on. Mm-hmm. It's just I didn't receive any notifications.
Just then, popped up just then.
No, I mean not even on my Twitch.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, it's come up just then on Discord.
Yeah, I just saw it, so I just had to double check. It's all good.
It's just a bit of a delay. It's a bit of a delay in my stream. So I'm going to put a dark outline in here. And this will be gone over with watercolor. So I tend not to use these thick brush lines too much, but sometimes it's very important to include them. And I do use the thicker, and this is a brush small. It has a small tip, but it's really good for like sketching and doing large areas. But because a lot of this picture is missing and I've had to put it in, it's not easy necessarily. So I'm going to just, I've had to find other references for this. So I'll put the darker areas in with the darker pen. And I have a 0.8, which is also very thick. Just bring that down there. There is an outline along here, like a highlight, and I want to put that in. I'm just going to move over here. You might not see me for a while I bend forward. Sometimes I'll tilt my picture so that I can get at the area I need to. So sometimes I have a sketchy approach where I'll sort of seem to sketch going like this, and other times I'll just put in bold lines. It just depends on what I'm working on. So we'll see what we end up with. The light area, and it's actually a very dark area. Now I go over this with watercolor, and a lot of these smaller, thinner lines will disappear. So it's quite tricky, as I said. I will have to add some darker areas in here. So that goes like I don't use the large brushes very much, but I do occasionally use them. So yeah. This is tricky because it's part of his ear. But the highlighting on it, not quite so good. The shadows, I mean. Unfortunately, I don't know how this area is going to be shaded, so I'm just going to shade it like this. And then in here, same. That's a 0.5, so that's actually quite a thick nib. Mostly I use the 0.1 and the 0.3, and then occasionally the very fine ones, but in general, not so much. So I'll just, the 0.3 and the 0.1 are the ones I use the most. There's a lot of lines in here, a lot of subtle shading. There's a lot of creases here. In here, like that. Yeah, this is always more difficult. That there. Because I tend to use one different pens, because if you just use the one thickness line, it ends up looking very flat. So I'll sometimes use the darker lines like this, and other times I'll use a fine pen, but I'll cross hatch it very close. So it makes it darker, but it makes it a different shade of grey. Not quite as dense, and that makes a big difference. But generally, if I want it, I tend to use mostly a 0.1. And that goes up here. So there you go. In there. And in here, so in here. So the next picture I do may or may not be from this series. I haven't really decided. I like to do at least 2 characters from each series that I watch, and then maybe go back and add more. But that all depends on whether I feel like doing it at the time. So do this down this way. Very tricky. So a lot of subtle shading in here. Put in, it's actually quite tricky. And very subtle shapes, because he has a lot of shapes in here, which I'm trying to draw it with a sketchy motion because I don't want them too dark, and yet that is part of it, like that. The trouble is the skin changes direction, so I don't know whether to do it this way, which I probably will, or do it the other way. So I'm going to do it this way, and this one will also this way. Yeah, it's kind of tricky. It'll go over that with watercolor, and a lot of these subtle lines will disappear, which is fine. But I'm trying to give the impression of he's very jolly, in spite of the fact that he's a prison guard, and he's trying to get back home to his wife and children. Just wants the war to be over. So if anyone who's seen Hogan's Heroes, actually a very interesting TV show, comedy, from set in World War One, but it was done, like I said, 1965 to 1971, I believe. So it was very entertaining. Let's see. all the subtle shading here. I like this character. He was quite amusing. Just trying to capture his personality in here. He certainly had a big personality too. And the actor that played him in the TV series is called John Banner. Right. So this is 0.01, and this is sort of the shading I want for here anyway. Yeah, quite like that. It's all shaded all the way. Like, there's lots of very subtle variations, and I do like to kind of capture all that, but some of it will be best captured in watercolor and others in pen and ink, but sometimes it's hard to get an idea what it's going to look like when you can only see a tiny little bit of it. So it's coming along. And as I said, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this bit of his helmet here. Don't know whether I'll just go in here with a brush, which I probably will end up doing. Not sure what's happening in here. Hmm. There's also a, there's always also a shadow under here. But it's an interesting designed helmet. And I will I get a 0.8 if I can find that. Nope, 0.5 will have to do. Hardest area to do with pen and ink, I have to turn the page to get that curve. Right. I think I've just put smudged, yes I have, smudged ink everywhere. That's not very clever of me. Right, let's just see if I can remove some of that while it's still kind of not dried properly. This is the problem when you get ink on your hand like that. You gotta be careful not to spread it everywhere, which of course I have done. Sometimes it'll lift up if you don't make it too dark, and other times it will not, in which case you have to fix it up. Trying to get the ink off my, which is why I always tend to keep a piece of paper towel to rest my hands on, so I don't do that precise thing. Generally I don't have a problem with it because I don't work with really dark areas, but because I've just put a large dark area in here which is not quite dry, it sometimes occurs. So because I have smudged it here, I shall draw this area in here. I really don't like hats because hats and helmets, because you end up with this area here that you've got to do something with, and you can't always. You do still get things happening in the dark areas, but you can't always see what they are. Like there's a darker area which comes down here, and I'm not entirely sure what that is, whether that's a part of the helmet or whether that's his hair. But his hair is actually in there, so that bit's not my favourite bit. But, you know. So I've done this area, done this area. Tricky bit. There's actually a darker area in here. Hmm. Zero point zero 0.05 is what I need to get. Looks like I'm going to do a bit of work with the 0.1 and 0.05. Right. Hogan, I see nothing. I know nothing. Yes. Hello, Hageman. How are you? He's one of my favorite characters. And that is why, because he always used to go, I hear nothing. I see nothing. And he saw everything was going on, but he's just like, I just want to get on with it. But he was. The next one is Colonel Clink. He goes, Hogan. And Hogan always got the better of him. But he knew exactly what was going on as well. So they all just wanted to keep their little thing going, and they just wanted to stay out of the way, just get the war over and done with, and just pretend they didn't know what was going on. That's what I liked about it. It was funny. And yes, I did like Colonel Clink, and I liked Sergeant Schultz, and he was a funny character. So yes, it's just a normal guy trying to get through the war. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's what I liked about him, because he had like a wife, and he just wanted, and I think he had kids as well, and he just wanted to have the war over and done with so he could just get home and just lead a normal life and forget about it. But of course he was conscripted, and as they all were, and of course Hogan was a prisoner of war, but he used that to be able to help others out as well in the POW camp. So I liked some of the adventures. It's like some of it was so obvious. You go, no way would they not have known what was going on. And then you go, well, because I think Hogan actually helped Colonel Clink out a couple of times when Hochstetter went and visited, and to get himself out of mischief or out of trouble, to keep Colonel Clink, in there. There was a couple of episodes he purposely missed. Yeah. I think I've got to go back and watch it again. I know that there were times when he sort of, even Colonel Clink, where he knew what Hogan was pulling, but he was the same. He just wanted to have the war over and done with. He didn't want to cause any trouble. And they didn't want to get rid of him. They didn't want him replaced because he was easy to fool. even though he knew exactly what was going on. It's kind of quite an interesting setup, I thought. I really liked the way they kind of handled things in there, and how they helped all the airmen and something like that to escape and stuff like that, which was quite interesting. And they were all like daft. Some of the plans were just stupid, and you're like, you would know the Germans aren't that stupid, you know. But yeah, it was kind of one of those things. It was meant to be a light-hearted look at it, but also my mum never liked it because she said she always found it stupid because she didn't like slapstick, kind of didn't really like slapstick humor. And because my parents are German, they didn't like Hogan's Heroes for obvious reasons. They tolerated it. They let us watch it, but they just thought it was stupid because they said such an unrealistic view of things. And the one thing my mother was just used to annoy her about it was how they made the Germans look really stupid. So she wasn't a big fan of that. She understood it. She just thought, typical American, you know, they have to, you know, make themselves look really good because, of course, the only one that came off looking good was Hogan, you know, and it was an American show. So she was kind of a bit like that with that. This archetype, the lovable guard that works for the Empire, is a good, warm character. He is. And I like it, just like that he's a jolly man. You know, he's just an everyday guy who has to do his job because he has no choice. He's there. He's making the best of it. He's trying not to stick, you know, like cause any troubles. You know, he's trying to keep his head down. He wants the war to be over so he can just go home. But I think at the last episode, from memory, they said, I was looking it up, he got a job in a toy factory or something like that after the war. So, yeah. So it did kind of like wrap up what had happened to the characters, you know, each of the characters and where they'd gone afterwards. I think it was kind of explained right at the very end that that's what happened. So that's not too bad. It's nice to know. It went on for quite a long time, and I watched the series, but I was quite young. I must have been about, I don't know, 12, 13, something like that when I watched the reruns. Probably a bit younger than that, when I used to get home from school by not doing my homework. But yeah, like I said, my parents tolerated it. They thought it was stupid, in terms of like, this is really far-fetched, you know, but they understood that it was really stupid and really far-fetched. So I guess in that respect, they didn't mind us watching it too much because they just went, it's no threat, it's just stupid, you know. At least my mother thought so. So that was kind of funny. Viewpoints of people who are on the other side, and they're, yeah. But we liked it. As kids, it was, to us, it was like funny. You know, it was just stupid, but it was funny. It's a bit of light-hearted comedy. It was all very innocent, you know. You kind of go, you know, it's not taking a serious, it's not making a serious political statement, and it was just a bit of fun. So in that respect, you know, I think that's why my parents didn't mind it too much, even though they did reckon it was very far-fetched. In that respect, they didn't overly like it, but like I said, they tolerated it. So yeah, but I do like the characters. Now this bit in the here is going to be really tricky because it's very subtle. A little stuff going on in here to get the, yes, innocent, that's right. It wasn't a dig, it was like, yeah, we accepted that happened, and we're just kind of having a bit of a laugh at everything. Because I watched Hello Hello on TV, the series, and that, I think that was an English, Hello Hello, Yeah, that was an English one, I think. It's about the French resistance, and that was funny. That was really funny too. And they had a dig at the Germans there, but they made fun of everyone on that show. You know, they made fun of the English, they made fun of the French, they made fun of the Germans, they the Americans, you know, that was, in fact, what was funny about that, I believe, was that they actually, the most fun they poked at anyone was themselves. You know, the English were the most stupid. You know, not the French wasn't so silly, but the English one, the English guy was, the English characters were like really silly, kind of a bit daft. So I did like that one too. Hello, hello, it was called. And that, yeah, that was silly. That was a silly show. I loved it. All right, so now there's a darker bit in here. This is really, you know, kind of subtle in here, so I'm not sure whether I'll be able to do that well. In here, you got darker areas happening. In here, it's kind of tricky. I'll get a 0.3, if I can find a 0.3. No, that's probably a bit dark. So there's a... No, I've done that. Not sure how the shading of this area goes. Being able to laugh at oneself, that saved many of souls. That's true. That is true. And you've got to be able to, don't you? I mean, at the end of the day, when all's said and done, if you can't, you see the humor in things, then sad world we live in. Some things aren't funny, and sometimes you do need to kind of give it time, but, you know, I think that's why comedy works so well, is because we end up laughing at ourselves, and then you don't take yourself so seriously. But some people still do, though. Some people still take themselves way too seriously. But you can't do anything for those people. And that bit looks weird at the top, but that's his hair. So I'm going to do something with this squiggly bit. There. Otherwise, it just ends up looking like a weird brain. Don't want that. All right. Very, very difficult. And especially here, the ears. There's a lot of light in here, so I'm not sure. Like that. And that's the bit that actually is the bit that's always dark inside the ear. It's a cauliflower ear. And then it goes down in here and moves like that. Like that. Ears are hard. Ears are very, very difficult. So there's a bit that comes along here. And another bit that comes along here. Oh, 0.05. That's why that line is really thin. And there's a bit that comes along in here. Not sure the shading is exactly right, but and then it's not going to look anything like an ear, but strange angle, I think. That. My father told me this man was a bodybuilder when he was younger. That would not surprise me, actually. John Banner was a very good actor. And he did other things. I think he was an Austrian actor. I'm going to have a look that up and have a look and see what he did, because I remember reading a bit about him and not being able to. Let's have a look. See, it was John Banner. Would not surprise me though. John Banner. Let's see what they say about him. They said he is an Austrian-born American actor, best known for his roles in Hogan's Heroes, of course. And let's see, he died in 1973, age 63. I was still quite young when he passed away. That's kind of sad. I'm trying to look to. Let's see.